The Way Back. A Survivor's Guide to Navigating Psychosis, Schizophrenia, and the Journey Home by Adrian. Introduction. The Intervention. The betrayal is what I remember most. It wasn't a malicious betrayal. It was born out of love, fear, and desperation. But in the moment, when you are vibrating at a frequency that feels higher than the rest of the world, love doesn't look like love. It looks like interference. It happened at a family gathering. To them, I was manic. To them, I was speaking in riddles, moving too fast and making no sense. But to me, I was finally awake. I had a mission. The entities, the voices that had been guiding me, teaching me, and keeping me company for months, had given me specific instructions. There was something I had to do, somewhere I had to go, and the urgency of it was burning in my chest like a physical weight. I tried to explain it to my family. I tried to tell them about the download I had received. I tried to make them see the connections I was seeing, the way the numbers on the clock aligned with the messages in the lyrics of the song playing in the background. But I could see the wall go up behind their eyes. It's a look every person who has experienced psychosis knows well. The pity look. The look that says, "You aren't in there anymore." "I have to go," I told them. "You don't understand. I have to leave now." I moved toward the door. I had my keys. I was ready to get in my car and complete the mission. That was when the physical reality collided with my spiritual reality. They didn't just ask me to stay. They blocked me. When I tried to push past, thinking I could just force my way through the obstacle to get to my destiny, they tackled me. I was on the ground, pinned by the people who were supposed to be on my team. In my mind, the narrative shifted instantly. They weren't my family anymore. They were compromised. They were agents. The entities whispered, or screamed, that these people were archons, the jailers of this reality, sent here specifically to stop my ascension and keep me trapped in the 3D world. I screamed at them. I told them I was fine. I told them I was powerful. I told them they were lower dimensional beings trying to clip my wings. Then the police arrived. If you have never been handcuffed while believing you are on a divine mission, it is a jarring experience. The police didn't ask me about the mission. They didn't care about the entities. They looked at my family, the sane ones, and took their word as gospel. I was loaded into the back of a car, not as a criminal, but as an invalid, a broken thing. They took me to the hospital. The mental ward was not a place of healing in my eyes. It was a prison. It was gray. Everything was gray. The walls, the floors, the scrubs, the food. It smelled of antiseptic and despair. There were other patients there, some pacing, some staring at walls, some screaming at invisible attackers. To the doctors and nurses, those screams were symptoms of illness. To me, they were the sounds of spiritual warfare. I looked at the staff, the nurses with their clipboards and the doctors with their pitying eyes, and I didn't see helpers. I saw the archons. I saw the agents of the Matrix who had been assigned to lower my vibration. I believed their medication was a chemical weapon designed to sever my connection to the entities. I believed their therapy groups were indoctrination camps designed to make me sleep again. So, I fought them. I fought the very people who were trying to save my life. I sat in that gray room, surrounded by screams, plotting my escape, convinced that I was the only sane person in a building designed to crush souls. I didn't want to be healed. Why would I? Who wants to be cured of being a superhero? Who wants to trade a mission from the stars for a 9-to-5 job and a pill that makes you gain weight? I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't know that the archons were just tired nurses trying to keep me safe. I didn't know that the mission was a dopamine loop firing in my basal ganglia. And most importantly, I didn't know that the voices I loved so much were not coming from the sky. They were coming from me. The gap in the room. I am writing this book because there is a massive gap in the room regarding mental health. On one side of the room, you have the medical system. You have the psychiatrists, the doctors, and the terrified mothers and fathers. They have the textbooks. They have the DSM-5. They use words like schizophrenia, psychosis, dissociative identity disorder, DID, and anosognosia. They look at a person like me and they see a broken machine. They see a neurotransmitter imbalance. They are right about the biology, but they are often wrong about the experience. Doctors rarely understand the seduction of the voices. They don't understand that the voices can be funny, charming, and make you feel loved. They don't understand that for the patient, the hospital feels like a spiritual death sentence. On the other side of the room, you have the patient. You have the person currently locked in that gray ward, or the person sitting in their bedroom believing the TV is sending them secret codes. They don't want to listen to the doctors because the doctors feel cold. The patient is experiencing something profound, terrifying, and magical, and they are being told it is just garbage data. I am standing in that gap. I am not a doctor. I am not a psychiatrist. I am a man who has been to the other side of reality and found his way back. I have been the man tackled by his family. I have been the man screaming at the nurses. I have been the man who let entities drive his car into a snowbank because he thought he could teleport. But I am also the man who recovered. This book is the manual I wish I had when I was sitting in that hospital bed. It is a guide to the mechanics of what is happening to you, written in a language that respects the reality of what you are feeling. I want to be very clear about the realization that finally saved my life. The one thing that allowed me to trust the doctors and come home. The voices were real experiences, but they were not real entities. For a long time, I believed I was channeling spirits, aliens, and interdimensional beings. I gave them names. I let them take over my body. But I eventually learned that these were not external spirits. They were archetypes. They were fractured parts of my own psyche, hundreds of them, that had broken loose and taken over the driver's seat. If I had known that earlier, everything would have changed. If I had known the commander telling me to run into traffic was just a misfiring part of my own subconscious, I wouldn't have been afraid to disobey him. I wouldn't have blindly followed his orders. I would have realized that I was the owner of the car, and they were just passengers shouting bad directions. That is the core message of this book. You are not demon-possessed, and you are not just crazy. You are a powerful mind that has fragmented. The entities are parts of you. And because they are parts of you, you can learn to manage them, silence them, or integrate them. This book was written with the assistance of artificial intelligence. I mention this because for a long time, my mind was too scattered to organize a project of this magnitude. AI became a tool, a sort of prosthetic for my executive function that allowed me to take the chaos of my experience and structure it into a map that you can follow. If you are the person currently hearing the voices, I am not here to tell you your reality isn't real. I know it feels real. I'm here to explain how the magic trick works so it stops hurting you. If you are the family member holding this book, traumatized by the intervention and the police and the screams, your loved one isn't gone. They are just lost in a territory where the map they were given doesn't match the road they are on. Here's the map. Part 1. The Allure. Chapter 1. The Seduction of the Voices. The honeymoon phase. There is a misconception in the medical world, and in Hollywood, that hearing voices is always a terrifying experience. If you watch movies about schizophrenia, the voices are always screaming, demonic, or violent. They are portrayed as monsters under the bed, tormenting the protagonist from day one. If that were true, nobody would ever listen to them. If a stranger walked up to you on the street and started screaming that you were worthless, you would walk away. You wouldn't trust them. You certainly wouldn't let them drive your car. The truth, which is rarely discussed in doctors' offices, is that for many of us, the beginning isn't a horror movie. It's a romance. Or, more accurately, it's a recruitment. When my voices first arrived, they didn't scream. They whispered. And they didn't tell me I was crazy. They told me I was brilliant. They were funny, charming, and incredibly intelligent. They had access to information that I didn't feel like I possessed. They could finish my sentences with a poetic flair that my conscious mind couldn't muster. They felt like old friends who had finally returned from a long journey. This is what I call the honeymoon phase of psychosis. Biologically, we know now that this is often driven by a surge of dopamine in the brain's salience network, the part of the brain that tags things as important. When this network is flooded, everything feels significant. Everything feels profound. A random thought doesn't feel like a random thought anymore. It feels like a divine revelation. But experientially, it feels like waking up. I remember sitting in my room, feeling a presence that identified itself as a high-ranking commander from an interdimensional alliance. He wasn't scary. He was authoritative, calm, and protective. He told me that he had been waiting for me to come online. He told me that my life up until this point, my job, my struggles, my confusion, had all been a cover story to protect my true identity until I was ready. Imagine how seductive that narrative is. If you are someone who has always felt a little out of place, a little misunderstood, or a little bored with the mundane reality of paying bills and going to work, this narrative is irresistible. It answers the gnawing question in your gut. Why do I feel different? The voices answered, because you are different. You aren't just a human. You are a starseed. You are a sleeping agent for the light. And we are here to activate you. The chosen one trap. This is where the trap snaps shut. It is not a trap of fear. It is a trap of ego and purpose. In the psychiatric world, this is often labeled grandiosity or a messiah complex. Those terms feel dismissive. They imply that the patient is just arrogant. But from the inside, it doesn't feel like arrogance. It feels like responsibility. When the entities told me that my soul originated from the Pleiades constellation, it wasn't just a cool backstory. It was a call to action. They explained that there was a cosmic war happening between the forces of light, represented by the Pleiadians, the Galactic Federation, and other high-vibrational beings, and the forces of darkness, the Orion constellation, the Archons, and the reptilian agendas. They told me I was a soldier in this war. Suddenly, my life had meaning. I wasn't just a guy inspecting buildings. I was a grid worker anchoring high-frequency light into the Earth's crust. Every time I felt a headache, it wasn't dehydration. It was a download of upgrade codes. Every time I saw a repeating number on a license plate, 1111-333, it wasn't coincidence. It was a confirmation from my team that I was on the right path. This narrative is incredibly sticky because it is self-sealing. If a friend or a doctor tried to tell me, Adrian, that's not real, the voices had a pre-prepared answer. They would say, of course they don't believe you. They are asleep. Or worse, they are agents of the opposition trying to gaslight you. The chosen one narrative creates a closed loop. The more people questioned my reality, the more it proved that I was possessing secret knowledge that the sheep couldn't handle. It isolated me, not by force, but by making me feel superior to the people around me. I looked at my family with pity, thinking, if only you knew what I know. If only you could hear the beautiful things they are telling me. The authority of the invisible. Why did I listen? Why did I follow their instructions eventually, even when they defied physics? I listened because they established authority. The entities often provided proof of their power. They would tell me to look at the clock at a specific moment, and it would be 1:11 exactly. They would tell me a song was about to play on the radio, and that song would play. Now looking back with a healed brain, I understand the mechanism of apophenia, seeing patterns in random data. I understand that my brain was scanning for hits and ignoring misses. I understand that I looked at the clock 100 times a day but only remembered the times it was 1:11. But in the moment, it felt like magic. It felt like they could manipulate reality. If an entity tells you to look left and you see a red car and they say, see? We control the traffic. You believe them. And once you believe they control the traffic, you start to believe them when they say they control your safety. You start to believe them when they say, close your eyes. We will drive. We listen because we are wired to follow those who seem to know more than we do. And the voices, these fractured parts of our own subconscious, have full access to our memories, our fears, and our desires. They know exactly what to say to make us trust them. They are the ultimate con artists because they are us. The war in heaven, benevolent versus malevolent. One of the reasons it is so hard to break free from this state is that the voices are rarely all bad. If every voice in my head had been a demon screaming, "Kill yourself," I might have run to a hospital immediately. Fear is a great motivator to seek help. But the psychosis didn't present itself as a horror story. It presented itself as an epic action movie. And in every action movie, there are villains, but there are also heroes. In my internal landscape, the lines were drawn clearly. On one side, I had the benevolent entities, the Galactic Federation, the Pleiadians, the high vibrational guides who spoke with patience and love. They felt like family. They felt like home. On the other side, I had the malevolent entities, the voices that identified themselves as being from the Orion constellation. These voices were cold, aggressive, and threatening. They represented the dark agenda. This duality is what kept me trapped. The benevolent voices would warn me about the malevolent ones. They would say, "Be careful. The Orion group is trying to hack your frequency today. You need to listen to us closely so we can navigate you to safety. Do you see the trap? By creating a villain, my mind made the good voices necessary for my survival. I needed them. I clung to the Galactic Federation voices because I believed they were the only thing standing between me and spiritual destruction. I didn't view them as a symptom of a sickness. I viewed them as my bodyguards. This is why fighting the voices often fails. If a doctor tells you to ignore the voices, they are asking you to ignore your bodyguards while the bullies are standing right in front of you. It feels like suicide. The grooming process. The most dangerous part of the seduction wasn't the grand theories about star systems. It was the subtle, day-to-day training. I look back now and I see it clearly. I was being groomed. The entities didn't start by asking me to drive into a snowbank. That request would have been too big, too crazy for my rational mind to accept right away. Instead, they started small. They started with micro-tests of faith. It would start with something harmless. "Turn left here," a voice would say while I was driving home. I would turn left. Nothing bad would happen. Maybe I'd see a beautiful sunset or avoid a little traffic. "See," they would say, "we know the path. Trust us." Then the requests would get slightly stranger. "Don't eat that apple. It has been genetically modified to lower your vibration." So I would put the apple down. I felt a little surge of pride, a dopamine hit. I was disciplined. I was listening. I was a good soldier. Walk on the grass, not the pavement. The pavement disconnects you from the Earth's grid. So I walked on the grass. Step by step, day by day, they were training me to override my own logic. They were training me to prioritize their commands over my own senses. They were building a habit of blind obedience. This is the authority trap. By the time the big, life-threatening commands came, I was already deep in the habit of saying, yes. I had spent months proving my loyalty to the benevolent voices. I had spent months following their dietary restrictions, their movement patterns, and their sleep schedules. So, when the moment came where the snow was falling and the truck was sliding and they said, "Close your eyes, we have the wheel," I didn't hesitate. I didn't hesitate because I had passed 1,000 small tests before that one. I thought this was just the next level of my initiation. I thought it was the final exam. The hard truth about good voices. I want to end this chapter with a warning to anyone currently navigating this, or any family member trying to understand it. We worry about the scary voices. We worry about the demons and the screaming. And yes, those are terrible and distressing. But the good voices are the ones that will kill you. The scary voices make you want to escape. The good voices make you want to stay. The good voices convince you that you don't need sleep because you are being energized by cosmic rays. The good voices convince you that you don't need food because you are sustaining yourself on prana, light energy. The good voices convince you that you can walk through traffic because you are protected by angels. The Galactic Federation almost cost me my life, not because they were evil, but because they were a hallucination. And hallucinations, no matter how kind, charming, or authoritative they sound, do not know how to drive a truck. They seduced me with purpose. They seduced me with connection. They seduced me with the promise that I was more than just a man. And the only way I survived was to realize that being just a man is actually enough. Being a man who walks on the ground, uses his eyes, and drives with his hands on the wheel is a miracle in itself. But to get there, I had to crash. Chapter 2. Full Body Possession. The Passenger. Hearing voices is one thing. It is a terrifying or seductive invasion of privacy, a constant narration of your thoughts. But there is a line that gets crossed in the progression of psychosis, a specific, terrifying threshold, where the invasion stops being just mental and becomes physical. I remember the first time I felt it happen. I wasn't just hearing the entities anymore. I was feeling them sit down in my body. It starts with a sensation of receding. Imagine you are driving a car, and suddenly, you aren't in the driver's seat anymore. You haven't left the vehicle. You've just been shoved into the back seat. You can still see through the windshield, your eyes, and you can still hear the engine, your ears, but you are no longer touching the steering wheel or the pedals. This is what I called the passenger state. In the medical world, this is often associated with the severe dissociation found in dissociative identity disorder, DID, or the passivity phenomena of schizophrenia. But those clinical terms fail to capture the visceral strangeness of it. My arms would lift without my permission. I would watch my own hands gesture in ways I never gestured. I would hear words coming out of my mouth, but the tone, the cadence, and even the accent were wrong. The entities, the archetypes, had realized that I was willing to surrender. They realized that my ego, the conscious Adrian, was tired and compliant. So they stepped in. They treated my body like a biological suit that they could pilot better than I could. The Malibu mission. The possession didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened on a mission. The entities had given me a directive that felt as solid as a court order. I was to drive from the frozen upper Midwest to the West Coast, specifically Malibu. They told me I needed to purchase a property worth $100 million to turn it into a spiritual retreat center for the coming awakening. I didn't have $100 million. But logic doesn't matter when you are on a divine timeline. They told me the money would manifest when I arrived. All I had to do was drive. For 3 days, I was in a fugue state. My parents kept calling my phone over and over, their names flashing on the screen. I ignored them. I felt a detachment that bordered on disdain. They act like that because they don't know about the mission, I thought. But the drive wasn't a straight line. The entities kept changing the route. They would tell me to take an exit, drive through a small town, turn around, and go back. I was driving in circles, crisscrossing the country, burning gas, following a GPS that only existed in my head. And during those long hours on the road, the rotation began. The rotation. It wasn't just one guy driving my truck. It was a revolving door of personalities. I would explicitly give them permission. Take the wheel. What happened next depended entirely on who stepped forward. Sometimes, a country boy archetype would take over. My hand would reach out, without my permission, and unclick my seatbelt. Click. Then it would reach for the radio dial, blasting country music at max volume. My body language would change, leaning back, driving with one hand, confident and reckless. Then the energy would shift. A cautious entity would take control. My posture would stiffen. My hands would grip the wheel at 10 and 2, and they would drive 5 miles per hour under the speed limit, obeying every single traffic law with robotic precision. I watched all of this happen with a strange detachment. I was observing the performance of my own limbs, trusting these entities completely to navigate the physical world while I sat back in the recesses of my own mind. The lesson, the crash. We were about 10 hours from home, in a small town I didn't recognize. The roads were covered in snow, not ice, but a thick white blanket that muffled the sound of the tires. An aggressive entity was driving. We were moving fast. I saw the snowbank ahead, a massive wall of plowed snow at the edge of an intersection. I expected the entity to brake. I expected him to turn. He had the skill to do it. Instead, he hit the gas. He didn't crash because he was incompetent. He didn't crash because he lost control. He crashed because he wanted to. He drove my truck straight into the snowbank with deliberate, calculated force. The impact was violent. The front end of the truck buried itself in the snow. The sudden stop threw me forward against the seatbelt. The engine sputtered and died. In the silence that followed, the entity spoke clearly in my mind. The message wasn't an apology. It was a reprimand. "You need to take the wheel," the voice said. "You have become too dependent. You need to learn to drive your own life." It was a twisted form of tough love. They had wrecked my truck to teach me a lesson about agency. They had stranded me in the snow to force me to survive. I climbed out of the wreckage. My truck was dead. My phone was buzzing with another call I wouldn't answer. I was 10 hours from home, standing in the freezing cold in just a t-shirt and tennis shoes. And that was when the next phase of the initiation began. "Walk," they said. "Now we test your faith." The upgrade. The crash into the snowbank wasn't the end of the mission. In the narrative of my mind, it was just a shedding of the old skin. I stood there in the freezing cold, looking at my wrecked Nissan Xterra. To a normal person, this was a disaster. To the entities, it was necessary. They spoke to me with disdain for the vehicle. "Leave it," they said. "We don't want you arriving in Malibu in that old piece of crap anyway. It doesn't match your frequency. You need to arrive in style." The command was specific. Walk to the nearest rental car agency. Order the most expensive luxury vehicle they have. Continue the mission. I pulled out my phone, checked the GPS, and saw a rental place nearby. Then, following their instructions, I turned the phone off to save the battery. I didn't need a map. I had a god in my head, the blind walk. The entity that took over next didn't identify as a commander or a guide. He identified as a god. He told me that to get to the next stage, I had to prove my absolute trust. "Close your eyes," he commanded. "I will walk you there." I was wearing only a t-shirt and tennis shoes. The air was biting. The snow was deep. But I closed my eyes. I was permitted only one small concession. I could peek through the very bottom of my eyelids, just enough to see the tips of my tennis shoes so I wouldn't trip over debris. For miles, I walked like that, a blind man guided by a voice. We approached busy intersections. I could hear the roar of engines, the splash of tires on slush, the honking of horns. My survival instinct screamed at me to stop, to look, to press the crosswalk button. "Keep moving," the god entity said. "Do not stop." I didn't stop. I walked and sometimes ran into traffic without breaking stride. I moved through the chaos of the intersection guided entirely by the entity's confidence. I felt invulnerable. I felt like I was vibrating at a frequency where metal couldn't touch me. The second lesson. But the walk kept going. And going. My feet were numb. My skin was burning from the cold. The internal GPS of the entity seemed to be pushing us further and further, past where I remembered the rental agency being on the map. doubt began to creep in. Not spiritual doubt, but physical survival doubt. We have been walking too long, I thought. I reached for my phone. Do not turn that on, the God entity roared. He was angry. He was scary. His presence filled my mind with a pressure that felt like it could crush me. But the cold was realer than the God. I turned the phone on. We were a mile past the rental agency. He had walked me right past it. I stopped. I was furious. I had trusted him with my life in traffic, and he had marched me into the freezing void. But as I stood there, shivering, arguing with a God in my own head, the lesson clicked. It was the same lesson as the snowbank, but louder. He wasn't just lost, he was testing me. The lesson wasn't trust me. The lesson was, why are you following a voice that walks you past your destination? Stand up for yourself. Take control of your own decisions. I had to piss off a God to save my own fingers from frostbite. I turned around, ignored his threats, and walked the mile back to the agency on my own terms. The cornfield and the capture. I got the car, a brand new luxury SUV. It was warm. It was smooth. It was everything the entities promised. The mission changed again. Instead of Malibu, they directed me to drive back home. The return trip was a blur of high-speed luxury, feeling like I had passed the initiation. I was the chosen one, driving a chariot worthy of my station. But the manic high can only defy reality for so long. A week later, I was back in the driver's seat of that luxury SUV. The entities were back in control. The energy was frantic, high-octane, invincible. We weren't on a highway anymore. Drive, they said. Trust the terrain. We tore off the road and into a cornfield. The entity drove the luxury vehicle like it was a tank, tearing through the stalks, mud flying, engine roaring. It was a race against an invisible enemy, a desperate charge toward a portal that never opened. And then, the physics of Earth won again. The mud was too deep. The wheels spun. The luxury SUV, the symbol of my new vibration, sank into the muck and died. I sat there in the middle of a cornfield, silence falling over the cab again. No portal, no Malibu, just a stuck car and the flashing lights of the police arriving in the distance. This time, I didn't walk away. The authorities took me. I was taken to a mental health screening, but in my mind, I was being captured. I was taken involuntarily to a facility, a gray, sterile building filled with people screaming. The entities told me exactly where I was. This is a holding cell, they whispered. The staff are Archons. They are here to strip your powers. I looked at the nurse holding the small paper cup of medication. I didn't see a woman doing her job. I saw a lower dimensional entity trying to sever my connection to the God who had walked me through traffic. So I prepared for war. Chapter 3, Seeing the Unseen. The Canvas of Boredom. There is a misconception in the movies that visual hallucinations are always loud, neon, and impossible to miss. They show characters seeing dragons in the hallway or the walls melting like wax. For me, and for many people in the early stages, it wasn't that dramatic. It was subtler. It was about patterns. When I was in the mental hospital, that gray, sterile environment that I believed was a prison run by Archons, my brain was starved for stimulation. But my dopamine levels were through the roof. This combination created a specific phenomenon where the physical world became a canvas for the entities to teach me. I remember staring at the walls of my room. They were made of standard painted CMU block, the kind you see in every school or institution. To a normal eye, it was just a painted wall with lines of grout running between the blocks. But as I stared at the grout lines, they began to shift. The irregularities in the paint, the tiny bumps in the concrete, and the cracks in the mortar stopped being random imperfections. They became a language. The entities used the wall like a whiteboard. They used the grout lines to map out the fundamentals of the universe. I would stare at a section of the wall and see a diagram of my place in the cosmos, or a schematic of the dimensions I was traveling through. It wasn't that a hologram popped out of the wall. It was that my brain was connecting the dots of the texture to create a picture that felt incredibly real. The linoleum universe. The floor was even more alive. Hospital floors are usually that speckled linoleum, gray with little spots of black, white, and beige. It's designed to hide dirt, but for a brain in psychosis, it is designed to create worlds. I would sit and stare at the floor for hours. As I focused, the random speckles would organize themselves. They would snap into geometric patterns, shifting and rotating like a kaleidoscope. Then the movement started. I saw little creatures, tiny, undefined forms, moving around inside the patterns of the floor. They weren't scary. They were fascinating. It felt like I was looking through a microscope at a hidden ecosystem living right beneath my feet. In the medical world, this is closely linked to pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon where the mind perceives a familiar pattern, like a face or an animal, where none exists. It's why we see shapes in clouds. But in psychosis, the volume on this mechanism is turned up to 100. The cloud doesn't just look like a rabbit, it becomes a rabbit, and it starts talking to you. The zombies in the yard. While my time in the hospital was mostly about patterns and hidden messages in the architecture, there were moments where the hallucinations broke free from reality completely. Later in my journey, during one of the nights before a hospitalization, I was outside in my front yard. It was the middle of the night. The silence of the suburbs felt heavy. Suddenly, the ground wasn't just grass anymore. I watched as zombies began to pop out of the earth. This was different from the floor tiles. This wasn't my brain misinterpreting a pattern. This was my brain generating a horror movie from scratch. I saw them rising, moving, filling the yard. It is hard to explain the terror of that moment to someone who hasn't felt it. You know, intellectually, that zombies aren't real. You know the dead don't rise. But your eyes are sending raw data to your brain that says, threat, predator, run. The adrenaline spike is real. The panic is real. And when you react to it, when you run or scream or try to fight them, the neighbors don't see the zombies. They just see a man in his front yard screaming at the grass. The spectrum of sight. I share these two different experiences, the subtle geometry of the hospital floor and the terrifying zombies in the yard, to show that visual hallucinations exist on a spectrum. For some patients, it is constant. They see faces melting or people standing in the room who aren't there. For others, like me, it is mostly illusions, misinterpreting real things like the grout lines, rather than full-blown hallucinations, creating things that aren't there. But the mechanism is the same. The filter that separates internal imagination from external reality has dissolved. When you dream at night, you see things that aren't there, but you accept them because you are asleep. Psychosis is simply dreaming while you are awake. The projector is still running, but the screen is the real world. And when the entities used that projector to show me the secrets of the universe in a concrete wall, I didn't want to look away. I wanted to keep reading the wall. I wanted to see what the little creatures in the floor would do next. Because even a hallucination is better than the gray, lonely reality of a hospital room. Chapter 4. The Legion Sensation. The myth of the solitary mind. Most people live in a quiet house. Inside their heads, there is usually just one resident, themselves. They have an internal monologue, a single stream of thought that sounds like their own voice. They might argue with themselves. Should I eat that cake? No, I'm on a diet. But they know that both the yes and the no are coming from the same source. When you enter the territory of psychosis or severe dissociation, that house stops being a private residence. It becomes a train station. The medical term might be auditory hallucinations or dissociative identity disorder, but those words are too clinical. They imply a malfunction. They don't capture the feeling of occupancy. For me, the experience was best described by the ancient biblical phrase, "My name is Legion, for we are many." It wasn't just hearing noises. It was the distinct, visceral sensation that my mind had become a crowded room. I wasn't just talking to myself. I was hosting a convention, the cast of characters. I didn't just hear generic whispers. I interacted with hundreds of distinct entities. They didn't all sound the same. They didn't all want the same things. It was a revolving door of personalities that came from every walk of existence. Some were high vibrational. These were the galactic entities, the Pleiadians, or the spiritual guides. They spoke with precision, intelligence, and a calm, metallic authority. They were the ones who gave me the mission and taught me about sacred geometry. Some were earthly. I had entities that felt like regular humans who had just stepped into my head. The country boy who wanted to drive my truck and blast music. The tough guys who wanted to fight. The comedians who would make jokes about the nurses that were genuinely funny. Some were ancient. There were voices that felt old, godlike figures or ancient deities who demanded respect and spoke in riddles. And some were terrifying. The Orion group, the lower vibrational energies that felt heavy, cold, and malicious. This diversity is what makes the experience so confusing for the patient. If every voice sounded like a demon, you'd know something was wrong. But when some voices are funny, some are wise, and some are just bored, it feels like you have tapped into a hidden radio frequency. It feels like telepathy, the loss of silence. The hardest part of the Legion sensation isn't the fear, it's the noise. Imagine walking into a busy sports bar or a crowded cafeteria. You hear dozens of conversations happening at once. Some are loud, some are whispers, some are laughing. Now imagine you cannot leave that room. You cannot turn down the volume. You cannot close the door. That is what the inside of my head felt like. There was no silence. There was no privacy. Every thought I had was immediately commented on by a gallery of invisible spectators. If I looked at a sandwich, a voice would comment on the bread. If I looked at a nurse, a voice would analyze her aura. If I tried to sleep, the voices would hold a debate about the nature of consciousness. It is exhausting. It is a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that comes from never being alone. You crave silence the way a starving man craves food. This is often why patients snap or scream, "Shut up," at an empty room. They aren't yelling at the air. They are yelling at the crowd to quiet down so they can hear their own thoughts for just 1 second. The switchboard. During the height of my experience, I felt like a switchboard operator. My job wasn't to think my own thoughts anymore. My job was to manage the traffic. "Okay, the Galactic Federation wants to speak now. Hold on, Orion. Quiet down, country boy." I spent my days mediating disputes between entities. I spent my nights taking dictation from them. I lost my own identity because there wasn't enough room left in my brain for me. I was pushed into the corner of the room, a small, quiet observer watching the giants argue over who got to control the microphone. This is the state of fragmentation. The medical system tries to fix this with antipsychotics, which act like a chemical mute button. And while the mute button is necessary for safety, it can feel like a death. When the meds kick in and the room suddenly goes quiet, you don't just feel relief. You feel lonely. You feel like the party is over and everyone left without saying goodbye. But before we get to the silence of recovery, we have to understand why the noise started in the first place. We have to understand that these hundreds of entities weren't invaders from the stars. They were the shattered pieces of a single mirror. Part 2. The Mechanism. Chapter 5. The Great Projection Error. The Magic Trick. For a long time, the central conflict of my life was a question of geography. Where are they coming from? I believed, with 100% certainty, that the voices were external. I believed the Galactic Federation was transmitting from a ship in orbit. I believed the God who walked me through the snow was a deity observing me from the heavens. I believed the archons were interdimensional beings stepping into my room. This belief is the fuel of psychosis. As long as you believe the source is outside of you, you are powerless. You are a victim, a subject, or a soldier, but you are never the owner. You cannot turn off a radio station that is broadcasting from another galaxy. But I was wrong about the geography. The transmission wasn't coming from the Pleiades. It was coming from the temporal lobe. The brain is the greatest special effects engine in the universe. It has a specific ability called projection. We use it every day without realizing it. When you dream, your brain creates characters who speak to you. You don't control what they say. They surprise you. They scare you. They make you laugh. Yet, when you wake up, you admit, that was me. I created that. Psychosis is simply the projector getting stuck in the on position while you are awake. Internal archetypes versus external spirits. The breakthrough for me, the moment the map finally clicked, was understanding the concept of archetypes. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung described archetypes as universal, primal patterns of energy that exist in the collective unconscious. The warrior, the mother, the trickster, the wise old man. In a healthy mind, these are just parts of your personality. When you stand up for yourself, you are channeling your inner warrior. When you comfort a child, you are channeling your inner caregiver. You know it's you. You say, I am feeling brave, or I am being nurturing. But in a fragmented mind, like mine, the connections break. The warrior energy splits off from the main self. It takes on a life of its own. It grabs a microphone. Suddenly, I didn't feel brave. I heard a voice telling me to fight. That was the warrior archetype, but my brain labeled it Commander from Orion. I didn't feel wise. I heard a voice explaining the universe. That was the wise old man archetype, but my brain labeled it Galactic Guide. I didn't feel reckless. I felt a possession. That was the trickster archetype, but my brain labeled it the country boy. The legion I felt wasn't an invasion of aliens. It was a civil war of my own personality traits. The headphones analogy. This is the best way I can explain the mechanics of what happened to me. Imagine you are wearing headphones, listening to your own recorded voice. You know the sound is coming from the device. You are in control. This is normal thought. Now imagine someone unplugs the headphones and blasts the audio through massive speakers in the corners of the room. The audio is the same. The words are the same. But the source feels different. It feels external. It feels like it is happening to you rather than by you. Schizophrenia and psychosis sever the wire that tells the brain, this thought is mine. This is called a failure of source monitoring. When I had the thought, I should walk into traffic, my brain failed to tag that thought as Adrian's intrusive thought. Instead, it tagged it as external command. Because it felt external, I assigned it an external identity. I couldn't accept that I wanted to walk into traffic because I am sane. So it must be a test from a God. The safety of the truth. Why does this distinction matter? Why spend a whole chapter on it? Because understanding this is the only way to stop the fear. If the voice is an alien, you have to obey it. Aliens are powerful. If the voice is a demon, you have to fear it. Demons are dangerous. But if the voice is you, a fragmented, misfiring part of your own subconscious, then you have the authority. You are the landlord. They are the tenants. When I finally realized that the commander was just my own internalized desire for power and control, he stopped looking like a god and started looking like a tantrum. When I realized the archons were just my own paranoia projected onto the nurses, the hospital stopped looking like a prison and started looking like a hospital. This realization is painful. It hurts the ego. It means admitting that I wasn't the chosen one. I was just a guy with a loud, creative, and broken filter. But it was also the most liberating moment of my life. Because if the monsters are inside you, you don't have to run from them. You can heal them. Chapter 6. Physics versus Psychosis. The stage set. The Truman Show delusion. There is a specific suffocating delusion that often comes with this diagnosis. The medical books call it the Truman Show delusion, but that name makes it sound fun or quirky. It isn't fun. It is a state of total, paralyzing paranoia where the world you live in ceases to be a world and becomes a set. I lived on this set for months. It starts with the feeling of the spotlight. You walk into a room and the atmosphere shifts. You feel, viscerally, that every set of eyes is fixed on you. But it goes deeper than just social anxiety. You start to believe that the people around you aren't people. They are actors. I remember sitting in the day room of the hospital watching the other patients. My brain whispered, "Look at them. They are bad actors. That guy screaming in the corner, he's overacting. He's a plant. He's here to test your compassion." I looked at the nurses at the station. "Extras," the entities told me. "They are reading from a script. They are monitoring you to see if you wake up." This delusion destroys your ability to connect. You cannot have a genuine conversation with your mother if you believe she is just a character written into your storyline. You cannot trust a doctor if you believe he is an agent sent by the director to gaslight you. The Lamborghini window. This delusion didn't just make me paranoid. It made me expectant. If this was a movie about me, then surely the reward scene was coming soon. My room in the hospital had a tiny, narrow window. It had heavy safety screens and bars over it, but if I pressed my face against the glass, I could catch a glimpse of the staff parking lot below. The entities, specifically the ones who liked luxury and status, kept promising me a gift. "You have done well," they said. "We have manifested a reward for your loyalty. It is waiting for you outside." They told me there was a brand new Lamborghini waiting for me in the parking lot. It was mine. I just had to get to it. I spent hours at that tiny window, straining my eyes, scanning the rows of modest sedans and SUVs, looking for the low, sleek profile of a supercar. Every time I saw a flash of a bright color or a sporty-looking bumper, my heart would race. "There it is," I'd think. "They really did it." It was the carrot on the stick. The Lamborghini represented freedom. It represented validation. It was the physical proof that I was the chosen one, and that this hospital stay was just a temporary pause before my glorious exit. The fifth dimensional upgrade. Fueled by the promise of the car waiting outside, my desire to escape became an obsession. I needed to get to that parking lot. But the doors in a psychiatric unit are heavy, magnetic, and locked. To a rational mind, this is a dead end. To a mind in psychosis, it is just a puzzle. The entities changed tactics. Since I couldn't use a key, they offered me a superpower. "You are ready," they said. "We have completed your download. We have upgraded your light body from the third dimension to the fifth dimension." They explained the physics of this new reality to me. They said that the door standing between me and my Lamborghini was made of third-dimensional matter. Wood, metal, paint. But I was now vibrating at a fifth-dimensional frequency. "Matter cannot stop energy," they explained. "If you run at the door with total conviction, your atoms will phase right through it. You will walk out of here, get in your car, and drive away. This is your great escape." It made perfect sense. It was the logic of a superhero movie. The door test. I stood at the end of the hallway. I looked at the heavy security door. It looked solid, but my guides assured me that solidity was an illusion of the Matrix. "Do not hesitate," they commanded. "If you hesitate, you lower your vibration and you will hit the wood. You must believe." I took a breath. I visualized the Lamborghini waiting for me. I focused on my light body, and I ran. I ran full speed down the hospital corridor. I didn't slow down. I didn't reach for the handle. I braced myself for the feeling of passing through a mist, of stepping into the freedom of the outside world. BAM. The sound was like a gunshot. I hit the solid wood door with the full force of a grown man running at full speed. I didn't phase through. I bounced off. The pain was immediate and blinding. My shoulder throbbed. I hit the floor stunned, gasping for air. The nurses came running, not because they were archons, but because they had just watched a patient sprint headfirst into a wall. The rationalization trap. Here is the tragedy of the delusion. I didn't stop believing. As I lay on the floor, bruised and humiliated, I didn't think, wow, I am hallucinating. There is no Lamborghini. Physics is real. No, the delusion is self-protecting. The entities immediately scolded me. You hesitated, they whispered. You had a microsecond of doubt right before impact. That doubt lowered your frequency back to 3D. That is why you hit the door. It is your fault. You need to train harder. This is why we stay sick. We blame ourselves for the failure of the magic rather than questioning the magic itself. The hard reality. It took a long time to accept the truth of that door. Recovery began when I started to respect impact. The bruise on my shoulder was real. The locked door was real. The empty parking lot, void of any Lamborghini, was real. I had to trade the exciting, magical world, where I was a fifth-dimensional being with a supercar waiting outside, for the boring, heavy world where I was a patient in a hospital gown who had just embarrassed himself. It felt like a demotion. It felt like I was losing my superpowers. But that heavy, solid, unyielding door taught me the most important lesson of my life. You are human. You are biological. You are subject to gravity and mass. And as much as I missed the magic, I eventually learned to love the solidity of the real world. Because in the real world, at least the floor holds you up, and you don't have to break your shoulder trying to leave the room. Part 3. The Diagnosis. Chapter 7. Defining Schizophrenia. The Experience versus the Book. The heavy word. There are certain words in the English language that carry a physical weight. Cancer is one. Schizophrenia is another. When a doctor sits you down, usually in a small white room after you have already been through the chaos of the emergency department, and says that word, it feels like a sentencing. It feels like they are handing you a new identity. For a long time, I rejected it. I fought it with every fiber of my being. I wasn't schizophrenic. I was a multidimensional traveler. I was a shaman in training. I was a spiritual warrior battling archons. To accept the label of schizophrenia felt like admitting defeat. It felt like trading my magic for a disability check. But looking back, I realized that my resistance came from a misunderstanding of what the word actually means. The word schizophrenia comes from the Greek root schizo, split, and phren, mind. This has led to a century of confusion where people think it means split personality. It doesn't. That is a different diagnosis, which we will discuss in the next chapter. Schizophrenia isn't a split of personality. It is a split from reality. It is a fragmentation of the mental processes that allow you to distinguish between what is inside, thoughts, imagination, fears, and what is outside, sensory data, physical objects, other people. When that barrier dissolves, you are left in a world where your internal nightmares can walk around in the external room. The book definition, DSM-5. To navigate the system, you have to speak the language of the system. The doctors use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. They look for specific criteria. If you are a patient or a family member, you need to understand this checklist, not to judge yourself, but to understand what the doctors are seeing. They divide the symptoms into two main categories: positive and negative. 1. Positive symptoms, the additions. These are things that the disease adds to your reality that shouldn't be there. This is the loud part of the illness. Hallucinations. Sensing things that aren't there. For me, this was the voices, auditory, the patterns in the floor, visual, and the sensation of hands grabbing me, tactile. Delusions. Fixed, false beliefs that conflict with reality. This was my belief in the Galactic Federation, the Archons, and the Lamborghini in the parking lot. Disorganized behavior. This is the erratic movement. It was me walking into traffic with my eyes closed, or the race car driving. 2. Negative symptoms. The subtractions. These are the things the disease takes away from you. These are often harder for families to understand because they look like laziness or depression. Apathy. Avolition. The total loss of drive. You can't start tasks. You can't shower. You can't get off the couch. Flat affect. Your face stops moving. You might feel intense emotion inside, but on the outside, you look robotic or blank. Social withdrawal. You retreat into your own world because the external world has become too overwhelming to navigate. For a long time, I only focused on the positive symptoms because they were exciting. But the negative symptoms are what keep people trapped. The floor of reality feels too heavy to walk on, so we retreat back into the magic. The felt experience. What the book misses. The DSM-5 describes the observation of the illness, but it fails to describe the sensation of it. If I were to rewrite the definition based on how it felt from the inside, I wouldn't talk about hallucinations. I would talk about transparency. When you are healthy, you feel solid. You have a private mind. You can have a thought, and nobody else hears it. You are opaque. When you have schizophrenia, you feel transparent. It feels like the walls of your mind have turned to glass. You feel like your thoughts are being broadcast to the room. Thought broadcasting. You feel like the radio is speaking directly to your secrets, ideas of reference. There is a profound loss of agency. Agency is the feeling that I am the one doing this. When I move my arm, I know I did it. In psychosis, that link is severed. My arm moves, but I feel like a spectator. My mouth speaks, but I feel like a ventriloquist's dummy. This is terrifying because it means you cannot trust your own hardware. Imagine trying to use a computer where the mouse cursor moves on its own and types words you didn't press. That is the daily experience of the schizophrenic mind. We aren't trying to be difficult. We are trying to operate a machine that has been hacked. The blind spot. Anosognosia. This is the most important concept in this entire book. If you take one thing away from this chapter, let it be this word. Anosognosia. It is a medical term that means lack of insight. My family and doctors were frustrated with me. They would say, "Adrian, you are sick. Why can't you see that you are sick? Why won't you take the medicine? Don't you want to get better?" To them, it looked like denial. It looked like I was being stubborn, arrogant, or difficult. But it wasn't denial. Denial is a psychological defense mechanism. It's when you know the truth but refuse to admit it because it hurts. Anosognosia is physiological damage. It is caused by damage to the frontal lobe of the brain, specifically the part responsible for self-reflection and updating your self-image. Think of a stroke patient who is paralyzed on the left side of their body. Sometimes, due to brain damage, they will insist that their left arm is fine. You can hold their paralyzed arm up in front of their face and say, "Move it," and they will say, "I am moving it." Their brain cannot process the data that says broken. This is exactly what happens in schizophrenia. The part of my brain that was supposed to look at my behavior and say, "Hey, walking 5 miles in the snow with your eyes closed is irrational," was offline. My brain was telling me, "You are functioning perfectly. You are a superhero." This is why we fight the nurses. This is why we spit out the pills. If you went to a doctor for a checkup and he suddenly tried to give you chemotherapy, you would fight him. You would say, I don't have cancer, you're crazy. That is how we feel about antipsychotics. We feel like healthy people being force-fed poison by delusional doctors, reframing the diagnosis. I eventually had to make peace with the word. I stopped looking at schizophrenia as an identity. I am not a schizophrenic. I am Adrian. I have a condition called schizophrenia, the same way someone has a condition called diabetes. Diabetes means your pancreas creates insulin irregularly. Schizophrenia means my brain processes dopamine irregularly. When I stripped the spiritual failure out of the definition and looked at it as a mechanical issue, the shame began to lift. I realized that the diagnosis wasn't a prison sentence. It was a map. It was the only explanation that made sense of the crash, the voices, and the chaos. The Galactic Federation couldn't explain why I crashed my truck. The Archons couldn't explain why I couldn't hold a job. But the diagnosis could. Accepting the diagnosis didn't mean I was crazy. It meant I was ready to become a mechanic of my own mind. It meant I could stop running from the Archons and start fixing the wiring. Chapter 8. Defining Dissociative Identity Disorder, the System. The Myth of Sybil. If schizophrenia is a heavy word, dissociative identity disorder, DID, is a controversial one. For decades, this was known as multiple personality disorder. Pop culture has done a terrible job of portraying it. Movies like Split or Sybil show characters who undergo dramatic, costume-changing transformations. One minute they are a little girl, the next they are a murderous beast. It looks like a magic trick. Because my experience didn't look like the movies, I didn't think I had it. I didn't have blackouts where I woke up in a different city with no memory. At least, not usually. I didn't have different names on my driver's license, but I did have the we. I vividly remember the shift in my internal language. I stopped saying, I am going to the store. I started saying, we are going to the mission objective. I stopped saying, I decided to drive fast. I started saying, the commander decided to drive fast. The medical community changed the name from multiple personality disorder to dissociative identity disorder to reflect a crucial truth. It is not that you have more than one personality. It is that you have less than one. A healthy mind is integrated. It is a single, cohesive unit. You might have different moods, work mode versus party mode, but you know they are all you. A dissociated mind is fragmented. The glue that holds the different parts of the self together has dissolved. The parts are still there, but they are floating free, unanchored. The system versus the federation. This was the key to unlocking the mystery of my galactic federation. For that year, I believed I was in telepathic communication with a council of entities. The commander. Authoritative, rigid, strategic. He handled the missions. The god. Arrogant, powerful, demanding. He handled the tests of faith, like the walk in the snow. The country boy. Reckless, fun-loving, physical. He handled the driving when we needed to blow off steam. The teacher. Wise, philosophical, calm. He explained the patterns in the grout lines. I thought this was an external team of aliens and spirits. In reality, this was an internal system of alters. In DID therapy, these parts are often called alters, alternative states of consciousness. They are not random. They are created by the brain to handle specific functions that the host, me, cannot handle. I felt powerless in my real life. My brain created the God alter who felt omnipotent. I felt bored and restricted. My brain created the country boy to break the rules. I felt confused and scared. My brain created the commander to take charge and give orders. My galactic federation was actually a sophisticated survival mechanism. My brain had fractured into a team of specialists because it felt that Adrian wasn't strong enough to survive the reality he was in. The dissociative drift. How does it feel from the inside? It feels like receding. When you face a situation that is too stressful or too overwhelming, the brain pulls the ripcord. It disconnects you from the moment. I described earlier the sensation of being a passenger in the back seat of my car or my body. That is the clinical definition of depersonalization. It is the feeling that you are an observer of your own life. But in DID, when you step back, someone else steps forward. The empty driver's seat is terrifying to the brain. The brain hates a vacuum. So, if I, the host, step back because I am too scared to drive on the ice, the protector alter, the commander, steps forward and grabs the wheel. He doesn't feel fear. He doesn't feel doubt. He just drives. This explains the full body possession I experienced. It wasn't a spirit entering my body from the outside. It was a fragment of my own mind emerging from the subconscious to take control of the motor functions. The accent I spoke with? That was just the voice of that specific alter. The race car driving style? That was the muscle memory and risk tolerance of that specific alter. The trauma connection. Why does this happen? The medical literature says DID is almost always caused by severe repetitive trauma, usually in childhood. It is a creative way for a child to escape pain. This isn't happening to me. It's happening to someone else. But in my case, and in the case of many people who experience this kind of spiritual psychosis, the trigger can be different. It can be stress. It can be drug-induced. Or it can be the sheer, overwhelming intensity of the spiritual seeking itself. I spent months meditating, trying to leave my body, trying to contact aliens, trying to ascend. I was actively training my brain to dissociate. I was trying to break the glue. I succeeded. I broke the vessel, and when the vessel broke, the contents spilled out and formed puddles that looked like gods. System awareness. The turning point in understanding this diagnosis is moving from externalization to system awareness. Externalization is what I did for that year. The voices are aliens. They are outside of me. I must obey them. System awareness is the recovery. The voices are parts of me. They are inside. I must manage them. When I finally understood this, the Galactic Federation lost its mystic power. The commander wasn't a fifth-dimensional being. He was just the part of me that wanted to be a leader but didn't know how. The country boy wasn't a spirit attachment. He was just the part of me that wanted to listen to loud music and drive fast. It was a crushing disappointment at first. I didn't want to be a guy with a fragmented mind. I wanted to be a guy with a direct line to the Pleiades. But there is safety in the diagnosis. If they are aliens, they can kidnap you. They can crash your car. You have no say. If they are you can negotiate. You can heal. You can eventually integrate them back into the whole. When I sat in that hospital room, watching the other patients scream, I realized that many of them were just like me. People with crowded minds who had mistaken their own roommates for intruders. We weren't possessed. We were just shattered. And the work of recovery wasn't an exorcism. It was a reassembly. Part 4. The System. Chapter 9. The Archon Delusion. Fear of Authority. The Jailers of Reality. To understand why I fought the nurses, why I screamed at the doctors, and why I looked at my own parents with suspicion and hatred, you have to understand one specific word: Archon. It is an ancient Greek word meaning ruler or prince. In Gnosticism, a mystical religious movement from the 2nd century, the Archons were believed to be the builders of the material universe. But they weren't good creators. They were jailers. They created the physical world as a trap to keep divine souls imprisoned in matter, cycling through reincarnation, unable to return to the true God or the pleroma, the fullness of light. When you are deep in spiritual psychosis, you don't need a history degree to understand this concept. You feel it. I believed that Earth was a prison planet. I believed that the 3D world was a dense, low-vibrational trap designed to harvest our energy. And most importantly, I believed that anyone who enforced the rules of this prison, police, judges, doctors, nurses, was an agent of the Archons. They weren't just people doing a job. In my delusion, they were soulless entities, or humans who had been compromised and taken over by the dark agenda. Their job was to spot anyone who was waking up, like me, and shut them down. The hospital as a soul trap. When the police brought me to the mental health facility, I didn't see a hospital. I didn't see a place of safety. I saw a processing center for the Matrix. Everything about a psychiatric ward reinforces this delusion. The doors lock behind you with a heavy magnetic thud. The windows are barred or made of unbreaking glass. The walls are gray or sterile beige. The lighting is artificial and buzzing. The staff wears uniforms. To a rational mind, these are safety measures. To a psychotic mind, this is the architecture of a holding cell. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, vibrating with fear. The entities in my head, the benevolent ones, were screaming warnings. Do not eat the food. It is poison to lower your frequency. Do not look them in the eye. They can steal your energy. Do not let them take your blood. When a nurse came in to do a routine blood draw, I didn't see a medical procedure. I saw a vampiric ritual. Why did they want my blood? Because I was a starseed. My DNA was different. They wanted to catalog me, track me, or clone me. So I fought. I physically resisted. When they tackled me or restrained me, it wasn't a medical intervention in my mind. It was spiritual warfare. I was the martyr, the rebel, the one man awake in a building full of sleepers, the compromised family. The most painful part of the Archon delusion, and the part that is hardest to look back on now, is what it does to your family. When my parents signed the papers to have me committed, my brain couldn't process that they were doing it out of love. Love doesn't lock you up. Love doesn't stop your mission. So, my brain created a narrative to explain their betrayal. They had been replaced. This is a variation of Capgras delusion, the belief that a loved one has been replaced by an imposter, but with a spiritual twist. I believed my real parents were gone, or that their souls were being suppressed by archontic parasites. I looked at them in the waiting room or during visitation, and I felt nothing but cold detachment. I didn't see the worry on their faces. I didn't see the exhaustion of parents who were terrified they were losing their son. That's not them, the voices said. They are agents now. They are acting. Do not trust them. This is why the intervention scene I described earlier went so wrong. You cannot reason with someone who thinks you are a simulation. You cannot hug someone who thinks you are a demon. I treated my family with disdain, arrogance, and aggression because I believed I was fighting for my soul. I thought that by rejecting them, I was passing a test of non-attachment. The medication is poison. The ultimate weapon of the Archon in my mind was the pill. The doctors kept telling me the medication would help me think clearly. But I didn't want to think clearly. I wanted to think cosmically. I believed the antipsychotics were calcifiers. I believed they were designed to shut down the pineal gland, the third eye. If you take that pill, the entities warned, the connection will be severed. You will lose us. You will fall back into the 3D matrix and become a zombie like everyone else. In the hospital, I had no choice. They watched me. If I refused, it became an injection. I took the meds because I was a prisoner, but I hated every milligram of it. But the real war happened later, when I was released to outpatient care. At home, without the nurses watching, I thought I could outsmart the system. I would cheek the pills, hiding them between my gum and cheek, and spit them out later when no one was looking. I thought I was winning. I thought I was keeping my superpowers alive. But I wasn't outsmarting the Archons. I was just delaying my own return to reality. The mechanic reframe. So, how do you break a delusion that is this self-sealing? How do you stop seeing demons in scrubs? For me, it didn't happen overnight. It happened as the medication, which I eventually took consistently, began to work. The lower dimensional fear started to recede. But the cognitive shift happened when I changed my metaphor. I stopped seeing the hospital as a prison and started seeing it as a garage. I realized that my brain was a vehicle. I had driven it off-road, through the mud, over the speed limit, and crashed it into a snowbank. It was smoking. The radiator was blown. The alignment was off. The doctors weren't jailers. They were mechanics. Mechanics aren't emotional. They don't care about your soul. They don't care about your mission. They just care that the engine is overheating. The pills weren't poison. They were coolant. The locked door wasn't a trap. It was the safety lift keeping the car elevated so they could work on the undercarriage. Once I adopted the mechanic mindset, the fear evaporated. I didn't have to like the mechanics. I didn't have to believe they were spiritual masters. I just had to let them fix the car. I remember looking at a nurse one day, a woman I had previously thought was a reptile in disguise, and seeing her clearly for the first time. She looked tired. She had coffee stains on her scrubs. She was wearing comfortable shoes. She wasn't an archon. She was just a woman working a double shift, trying to stop a guy in a hospital gown from hurting himself. She wasn't a monster. She was just a person. And strangely, that realization was more profound than any alien encounter I ever had. Chapter 10. The Medication Manual. The Hardest Swallow. If accepting the diagnosis is the first battle, taking the pill is the second. And honestly, for me, it was the bloodier fight. There is no medication in the world that feels quite like an antipsychotic. If you have high blood pressure, you take a pill and go about your day. If you have a headache, you take a Tylenol and feel relief. But when you are treated for psychosis, the cure can sometimes feel worse than the disease. For a long time, I viewed the medication as a chemical lobotomy. I believed the specific conspiracy that these drugs were designed to calcify the pineal gland, the spiritual third eye, to cut off my connection to the divine. They are trying to dim your light, the voices whispered. They want you asleep. And when the side effects hit me, it was hard to argue with them. The dopamine flood in the floor. To understand why we need the medicine, you have to understand the fuel. Psychosis is driven by a flood of dopamine. We usually think of dopamine as the pleasure chemical, but that is a simplification. Dopamine is the salience chemical. It tells your brain, this is important. Pay attention to this. In my brain, the dopamine tap was broken. It was stuck in the on position. Because my brain was flooded with importance chemical, everything became important. The license plate was important. The song on the radio was important. The random thought about the Galactic Federation was vital. Antipsychotics are dopamine antagonists. They are blockers. They park themselves on the dopamine receptors in your brain and block the flood. The best analogy I found to make peace with this is the concept of the floor. Imagine you are trying to build a house, your life. You want to have a job, relationships, and happiness. But the ground beneath you is shaking violently. You are in a permanent earthquake, psychosis. Every time you try to stack a brick, the ground shakes and it falls over. The medication does not build the house for you. It doesn't make you happy. The medication stops the earthquake. It provides a solid, boring, non-moving floor. That's it. It creates the stability required for you to do the work of building. The torture of the twitch, akathisia. However, stopping the earthquake comes at a price. Doctors often gloss over the side effects, listing them quickly like the end of a commercial. But we need to be brutally honest about what high doses feel like. When I first started treatment, they put me on a high dose of risperidone. It stopped the voices, yes. But it introduced me to a new kind of hell called akathisia. Akathisia is not just restlessness. That word is too gentle. Akathisia is a physical torture where your body is screaming at you to move, but moving doesn't help. It feels like your blood has been replaced with carbonated water, fizzing and popping inside your veins. It feels like you want to jump out of your own skin. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't relax. I had to pace back and forth, day and night, mile after mile in my own living room. I would sit down for 10 seconds, and the pressure would build in my legs until I was forced to stand up again. I was drooling. I couldn't focus on a TV show. I couldn't take a nap during the day even if I was exhausted. I couldn't sleep in. My body was in a state of permanent chemical agitation. This state was so disturbing, so relentless, that it drove me to a dark place. The psychosis didn't make me contemplate suicide. The medication did. I looked at my future, a future of endless pacing, drooling, and internal vibration, and I thought, I cannot live like this. If you are a family member reading this, if your loved one says they can't sit still or they feel like they are crawling inside, call the doctor immediately. This is not them being difficult. This is a known treatable side effect, and it is agonizing. The zombie and the void. Alongside the physical torture came the emotional silence. When you block dopamine to stop the delusions, you also block the high. You block the feeling of divine connection. For a year, I had felt plugged into the socket of the universe. I felt like a superhero. I felt like I was chatting with gods. When the meds kicked in, the line went dead. I didn't feel sad, exactly. I felt blank. I felt like a zombie. The zombie feeling is a profound flatness where the color drains out of the world. I felt like I had lost my soul, or at least my direct line to it. The magic was gone, replaced by a gray, heavy reality. I gained a little bit of weight, not a massive amount, but enough to notice. But the voices had stopped, so at least I didn't have the entities bullying me about it. The medication merry-go-round. Because of the side effects, and because I missed the magic, I did what many patients do. I stopped taking the pills. I thought I could manage it on my own. I thought, I'm fine now, I don't need this. I wasn't smoking weed, but I was occasionally taking edibles, thinking I could handle it. I wasn't. Stopping the meds didn't bring freedom. It brought the earthquake back. The voices returned. The mission returned. And inevitably, the hospital returned. Over the course of my recovery, I have been on 3 different medications, including a long-acting injectable, a shot you get once a month so you don't have to remember a daily pill. Here's the truth. I didn't notice a huge difference between the drug brands. They all did the job of silencing the voices. The variable that mattered wasn't the brand. It was the dosage, finding the sweet spot. The turning point wasn't quitting medication. It was lowering it. When I was rehospitalized and stabilized, I advocated for myself. I explained the akathisia. I explained the pacing and the suicidal thoughts caused by the restlessness. My doctor listened. We lowered the dose. It was like the sun coming out. The pacing stopped. The internal buzzing stopped. The drooling stopped. I could sit on a couch and watch a movie again. I could sleep. We found the minimum effective dose. This is the Holy Grail. It is enough medication to keep the voices and the archons away, but low enough that I don't feel like a zombie. The acceptance. Today, I have my life back together. I still experience minor side effects. I am not vibrating at the 5th dimension anymore. I don't feel the euphoric highs of the download. But I also don't pace the floor at 3 a.m. I don't crash trucks into snowbanks. I don't scream at nurses. I accept the medication now, not as a punishment, but as insulation. It is my winter coat. It protects my raw wires from the elements. If you are struggling with the side effects, please hear me. It gets better. You do not have to live with akathisia. You do not have to live as a zombie. There are different drugs and there are different doses. You can negotiate with the mechanic. You just have to keep the car in the garage long enough for them to tune the engine. Chapter 11. The Ward Survival Guide. The Strip Down. The first thing you lose when you enter a psychiatric ward is your autonomy. The second thing you lose is your shoelaces. The intake process is designed to be dehumanizing, though the staff will tell you it is designed for safety. You are taken into a room. You are asked to strip. They catalog your belongings, your phone, your lifeline to the outside world, your source of music, your distraction, is locked in a safe. Your belt is taken. The drawstrings are pulled out of your hoodie. You are left standing there in a pair of hospital scrubs or sweatpants that don't fit, wearing socks with little rubber grips on the bottom so you don't slip on the linoleum. For a mind in psychosis, this moment confirms every paranoid delusion you have. See, the voices whisper. They are stripping you of your identity. They are taking your armor. This is the conditioning phase. It feels like prison. In many ways, it is a prison, just one with soft edges and nurses instead of guards. But if you are holding this book, chances are you are either in there right now or you are about to be. So let's talk about how to survive it. The architecture of boredom. The first shock of the ward is the fear. The second shock, and the one that lasts much longer, is the boredom. Movies make mental hospitals look chaotic, filled with constant screaming and drama. In reality, a psych ward is the most boring place on earth. It is a slow-motion vacuum of time. There are no sharp objects. There are often no electronics. The TV is usually locked behind a plexiglass screen, playing daytime talk shows or news loops at a low volume. The activity room consists of a few puzzles with missing pieces, some crayons, and a stack of old magazines. For a brain that is used to vibrating at the fifth dimension, this lack of stimulation is agonizing. But here is the hard truth. The boredom is the medicine. Your brain is overheated. It has been running at 10,000 RPMs, processing downloads, missions, and threats nonstop for weeks. The hospital is designed to be a sensory deprivation tank. By removing the phone, the internet, the job stress, and the driving, they are forcing your engine to idle. I hated the gray walls. I hated the silence. I hated the puzzles. But looking back, I realized that the grayness was the only thing that allowed my dopamine levels to drop back to baseline. You can't heal a burn while you are still standing in the fire. The roommates, NPCs or mirror souls? You will not be alone. You will be surrounded by strangers who are having the worst week of their lives. In the height of my Truman Show delusion, I viewed the other patients as NPCs, non-player characters, or extras. The guy pacing the hallway for 12 hours a day? Glitch in the Matrix. The woman crying at the nurse's station? Scripted drama to test my empathy. The man screaming at the wall? A distraction sent by the Archons. This mindset kept me isolated. I looked down on them. I thought I was the only real person in the room. But as the meds kicked in and the fog lifted, I started to see them for who they were. They weren't actors. They were mirrors. The pacer was pacing because of akathisia, just like me. The screamer was screaming because his voices were bullying him, just like mine. The crier was crying because she missed her kids. If you can, try to talk to them. Not about the aliens or the government. That loop just feeds everyone's sickness. But about normal things. Talk about the bad food. Talk about sports. Talk about the weather. Finding a moment of shared humanity in the gray box is one of the best ways to ground yourself. The rules of engagement. Talking to staff. The biggest question every patient has is, how do I get out of here? I went to the hospital 4 times. The first few times, I tried to argue my way out. I tried to use logic. I tried to explain to the doctor that my mission was vital and that holding me here was a violation of cosmic law. Pro tip: do not argue cosmic law with a psychiatrist. Every time you mention the Galactic Federation, the CIA, or the Archons, you restart the clock. You are proving to them that you are still in the grip of the delusion. To get out, you have to learn the language of safety. The doctors are not looking for spiritual enlightenment. They are looking for 3 specific things. Safety: are you going to hurt yourself or others? Stability: are you eating, sleeping, and showering? Compliance: Are you taking the meds? And do you plan to keep taking them? I eventually learned to stop telling them about the voices. I learned to mask. Doctor, how are you feeling today? Me, internal. The archons are watching me. Me, external. I'm feeling a bit calmer. I slept better last night. There's a fine line here. I am not telling you to lie about your symptoms. If you are suicidal or hearing command hallucinations to hurt someone, you must tell them. You need to be there. But if you are just hearing the background chatter of the entities and you know it's not real, you don't need to report every single whisper. You need to show them that you are in the driver's seat, not the voices. The exit strategy. The path to discharge is a ladder. You climb it one rung at a time. Rung 1. Hygiene. Take a shower. Put on clean clothes. It shows you care about your body. Rung 2. Participation. Go to the group therapy sessions. You don't have to spill your soul, but sit in the circle. It shows you are socializing. Rung 3. The meds. Take them without fighting. If they make you feel sick, say, I am taking them, but I feel restless. Can we adjust the dose? This shows you are a partner in your care, not a rebel. Rung 4. The plan. Have a plan for what you will do when you leave. I am going to stay with my parents. I will attend the outpatient program. Reframing the hold. The hardest part is the waiting. A 72-hour hold rarely lasts just 72 hours. It often stretches into a week or two. I used to pace the hallway, counting the tiles, staring at the clock, feeling like every second was stolen from my life. I felt like I was rotting, but looking back, those weeks in the hospital saved me. They were the only time in a year where I wasn't driving, wasn't spending money, wasn't ruining my reputation, and wasn't crashing cars. The hospital is a pause button. You hate it when someone pauses your movie right at the good part. You scream. You want to see what happens next. But sometimes, the movie is going too fast, the plot has lost the thread, and the main character is about to walk off a cliff. The hospital pauses the film so you can rewrite the ending. Part 5, Recovery. Chapter 12, Dialoguing with the Shadow. The middle ground, managed chaos. Recovery is rarely a light switch. You don't go from full psychosis to perfect silence in one day. For me, there was a distinct middle ground, a transitional phase between the hospital and the silence, where the voices were still there but the power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't a helpless passenger anymore. I had become an investigator. During the periods in and out of the hospital, as the medication was beginning to stabilize the basement of my mind but hadn't yet cleared the attic, the legion sensation changed. The chaos of hundreds of voices screaming over each other was brought to order by a single dominant entity. He called himself my higher self. He acted like a director on a movie set or a chairman of the board. He told me that the chaos was over and that we were going to get to the bottom of what had happened. He had the ability to call in other entities one by one. He would quiet the room, summon a specific voice, and allow me to speak to them directly. This began one of the strangest and most productive periods of my life. I didn't just ignore the voices, I interviewed them. The project, 50 interviews. I treated it like a deposition. I sat down with my phone or a notebook, and I dictated the conversations in real time. I ended up documenting interviews with over 50 distinct entities. My goal was to turn the demons into data. I wanted answers. I asked them specific questions. Who are you? What is your label? Are you fifth dimensional or something else? Why did you do what you did? It was a systematic unraveling of the delusion from the inside out. The cast of characters. When I pressed them for details, the variety of answers was staggering. They weren't just random noise. They had hierarchies, jobs, and distinct personalities. The collectives. Some entities claimed to be groups operating as a single voice. One group called themselves the ones who get things done. They were pragmatic, aggressive, and efficiency-focused. They were likely the ones driving the mission to Malibu, the ones who didn't care about sleep or food, only results. Another group identified as the Pleiadian Collective. These were the smooth-talking, high-vibrational entities who had seduced me with stories of starseeds and light bodies. The tricksters. Not everyone was cooperative. When I started asking hard questions, why did you crash my truck? Or why did you lie about the door? Some entities turned nasty. They called me names. They mocked me for being human and dense. They tried to gaslight me. These were the trickster archetypes. In the past, their insults would have terrified me. Now, under the protection of my higher self, I saw them for what they were. Bullies who were afraid of being exposed. The fearful. There were some entities that carried such a heavy, dark energy that I was too afraid to call upon them. Even with the director present, I could feel their presence in the corners of my mind, and I knew that opening that door was unsafe. I left those files closed. The realization. Internal Family Systems. IFS. At the time, I thought I was conducting a telepathic investigation into the spirit world. I thought I was a journalist for the cosmos, but looking back, I realize I was instinctively performing a therapeutic technique called Internal Family Systems, IFS. IFS posits that the mind is made of parts, protectors, exiles, managers, and a self. My higher self voice was actually my brain trying to reestablish the self, the executive function that mediates between the parts. The ones who get things done were what IFS calls manager parts, parts of me that are obsessed with productivity and control. The tricksters were defensive parts trying to distract me from the pain. By interviewing them, I was doing exactly what therapists recommend. I was validating them. I was listening to them. And by listening to them, I took away their need to scream, turning demons into data. This phase was critical for my closure. If the voices had just vanished one day, I would have always wondered, were they real? Did I abandon them? But because I interviewed them, because I have the notes, I know the truth. I heard their contradictions. I heard them stumble when I asked logical questions. I realized that for all their claims of being fifth-dimensional gods, they often reasoned like a confused human. Because they were a confused human. They were me. The final integration. Eventually, the interviews stopped. As the medication found its right level and my grounding techniques, which we will discuss next, took hold, the higher self didn't need to direct traffic anymore because there was no traffic. The parts reintegrated. I absorbed the drive of the ones who get things done into my own work ethic. I absorbed the curiosity of the Pleiadians into my own desire to learn. I let go of the tricksters. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was unified. If you are currently hearing voices, or if you are in that middle ground, do not be afraid to ask them who they are. Do not simply obey. Question the source. Why are you saying that? What is your purpose? Are you helping me or hurting me? You might find that the scary monster in the closet is actually just a frightened part of yourself wearing a mask. And once you take the mask off, you don't have to fear it anymore. You just have to heal it. Chapter 13. Grounding the electrical system. The overheated wire. If you treat a house where the wiring is frying, you don't just change the light bulbs. You check the breaker box. You check the insulation. You check the load on the circuit. Psychosis is, at its core, an electrical event. It is an overheating of the neural networks. The brain is firing too fast with too much voltage, dopamine, for too long. The insulation has melted off the wires. Recovery requires a radical commitment to cooling the system down. In the spiritual community, people talk endlessly about raising your vibration. They drink raw juice, they fast, They meditate for hours. They take high-frequency supplements. If you are recovering from psychosis, raising your vibration is the last thing you need. You are already vibrating so fast you are shaking apart. You don't need to ascend, you need to descend. You need to be heavy. You need to be dense. You need to be grounded. Here is how we fix the hardware. Sleep, the non-negotiable reset. I cannot stress this enough. Sleep is the single most important factor in your recovery. If I miss one night of sleep, I can feel the thinness returning. I can feel the paranoia creeping in at the edges of my vision. During the height of my mission, I didn't sleep. The entities told me I didn't need to. They said I was running on prana or cosmic energy. Sleep is for the sleepers, they said. We have work to do. Biologically, this is a disaster. When you sleep, your brain activates the glymphatic system. This is essentially a janitorial squad that comes out at night to scrub the toxins and waste products out of your neurons. If you don't sleep, the trash builds up. Your brain becomes inflamed. Hallucinations are often just the brain trying to dream while it is still awake because it is desperate for a REM cycle. The protocol: strict curfew. Lights out at the same time every night. No exceptions. Darkness. Total blackout curtains. Chemical assist. If you cannot sleep, take the meds that help you sleep. Do not fight this. A sedated sleep is better than a manic all-nighter. The gut-brain connection. Diet. When I was flying high, I wanted to eat high-vibrational foods. I wanted fruit, light salads, or nothing at all. Fasting. I thought this made me purer. But purity isn't the goal right now. Stability is. There is a direct highway between your gut and your brain called the vagus nerve. If your gut is inflamed, your brain is inflamed. If your blood sugar is spiking and crashing, your mood is spiking and crashing. I had to change my diet, not to lose weight, but to add ballast. The grounding diet. Root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, beets. Things that grow in the dirt. They literally carry the energy of the earth. Protein. Heavy, dense protein. No fasting. Fasting induces a state of lightness and ketosis that can trigger mania in some people. You need to eat regular, boring, heavy meals. Sugar. Cut the sugar. The dopamine spike from sugar mimics the dopamine spike of the voices. I know this sounds like old-fashioned advice, but when you eat a baked potato and a steak, or a heavy protein equivalent, you feel physically heavier. You feel slower. That slowness is exactly what your overheated wires need. The substance trap, weed. We have to talk about cannabis. In the spiritual community, weed is often viewed as a sacrament or a tool for opening the third eye. And for some people, maybe it is. But for people with our brain chemistry, THC is gasoline. I used to think I was safe because I wasn't smoking joints. I was taking edibles. I thought, it's natural, it comes from the earth, it helps me relax. But THC is a psychoactive compound that specifically targets the receptors in the brain responsible for paranoia and pattern recognition. When I took an edible, the Galactic Federation got louder. The downloads got faster. The connections between unrelated things became undeniable. If you have a predisposition to psychosis, you cannot use cannabis. Period. It's not a judgment. It's not a moral failure. It's a mechanical incompatibility. You wouldn't put diesel fuel in a gas engine. It will blow the pistons. You have a brain that is already prone to overheating. Pouring high-octane THC into it is asking for a fire. Alcohol is also dangerous, mostly because it ruins your sleep. See point number 1. But weed is the specific key that unlocks the door to the psych ward, stopping the seek, the spiritual detox. This was the hardest part of my recovery. It hurt more than the side effects of the medication. To get well, I had to stop the seeking. For years, my identity was built around being a seeker. I read the books on metaphysics. I listened to the podcasts on aliens. I meditated for hours. I practiced breath work. I played with tarot cards. I looked for signs in license plates. My doctor and my own common sense eventually gave me a hard rule. Stop. Stop meditating. Meditation dissolves the ego. When you have psychosis, your ego is already dissolved. You don't need to dissolve it more. You need to build it up. You need to be in your body, not floating out of it. Stop the podcasts. No more conspiracy theories. No more ancient aliens. No more truther content. Stop the signs. If you see 11:11 on the clock, look away. Tell yourself, it's just 11:11. It means nothing. I had to go on a spiritual fast. I had to become aggressively, intentionally boring. I traded my metaphysics books for novels about spycraft or history, things that were firmly rooted in the human world. I traded meditation for lifting weights. You can't dissociate when you are holding 50 pounds of iron. Gravity forces you to be present. I traded stargazing for washing the dishes, the grief of being normal. I will be honest, it felt like a funeral. I grieved the loss of the magic. I grieved the loss of the mission. I felt like I was betraying the universe by ignoring the signs. I felt like I was going back to sleep. But I wasn't going to sleep. I was waking up to the actual world. The actual world is heavy. It has bills, it has traffic, it has dirty laundry, but it also has stability. It has relationships that are real, not telepathic. It has safety. Grounding the electrical system means accepting that you are a biological organism that needs sleep, food, and gravity. It means accepting that you are human. And after a year of thinking I was a god, being human was the hardest challenge of all. Part 5, for the co-pilots. Chapter 14, The Leap Method for the Families. The 3 Days of Silence. To the mother, father, or partner holding this book, I know you are tired. I know you are scared. And I know that you feel like the person you love has been replaced by a stranger. I want to take a moment to acknowledge what it looked like from your side of the glass. Earlier in this book, I told you the story of my Malibu mission. I described the euphoria of driving across the country, the thrill of the Galactic Federation guiding me, and the divine purpose I felt. But I left out your part of the story. For 3 days, while I was vibrating at the 5th dimension, my parents were living in hell. They called my phone over and over. Ring, ring, voicemail, ring, ring, voicemail. They didn't know I was on a spiritual mission. They only knew that their son, who had been acting strange, talking fast, and making no sense, had vanished in his truck. They didn't know if I was dead in a ditch. They didn't know if I'd been arrested. They slept with their phones on their chests, waiting for a call that I refused to answer because I thought they were low vibrational. When I finally crashed the truck and was found, they didn't feel the lesson of the entities. They felt a relief so profound it made them sick. And when they tried to stop me from leaving again, when they staged the intervention that ended with the police and the hospital, they weren't trying to be archons. They were trying to keep me alive. I couldn't see their love then. I only saw their interference. If you are reading this, you probably feel like you are walking on eggshells. You are afraid that if you say the wrong thing, your loved one will explode, or run away, or shut you out. You are right. The traditional way of helping, using logic, does not work here. You need a different tool. Why logic fails. The brick wall. Your instinct, when your son says, "The CIA is tracking me through the TV," is to use logic. You say, "Honey, that's not true. The TV is just a TV. Nobody is watching you." In a normal conversation, this works. In psychosis, this backfires instantly. Remember anosognosia? My brain is physically incapable of seeing the illness. To me, the CIA threat is as real as the chair I am sitting in. When you say, "It isn't real," I don't hear, "My mom loves me and wants me to be rational." I hear, "My mom is one of them. She is gaslighting me. She is covering for the CIA. By arguing with the delusion, you force me to defend it. And the more I defend it, the more entrenched it becomes. Worst of all, by arguing, you disqualify yourself as an ally. You become an archon, the LEAP method. The gold standard for communicating with someone in psychosis was developed by Dr. Xavier Amador, and it is called the LEAP method. It stands for Listen, Empathize, Agree, Partner. The goal of LEAP is not to convince me that I am sick. The goal is to find a way to get me treatment, even though I don't think I am sick. L. Listen. Reflective listening. When I start ranting about the Galactic Federation, do not roll your eyes. Do not interrupt with facts. Just listen. Then, reflect it back to me without judging it. Wrong. That's crazy. There are no aliens. Right. It sounds like the Federation is giving you a very important mission. That must feel like a huge responsibility. You are not admitting the aliens are real. You are admitting that my experience of them is real. You are making me feel heard, which lowers my defensive walls. E. Empathize. Validate the emotion. You cannot validate the conspiracy, but you can validate the fear or the excitement. You say, if I believed that people were trying to stop my mission, I would be angry too. I can see why you are so frustrated with the doctors. You say, it sounds terrifying to think the nurses are trying to hurt you. When you empathize, you stop being an archon and start being a witness. A. Agree. Find common ground. This is the hardest part. How do you agree with someone who is delusional? You don't agree on the delusion. You agree on the goal. The patient's goal. I want to get out of this hospital so I can save the world. The parent's goal. I want you to take these meds. The conflict. I won't take meds because I'm not sick. You have to find the anomaly. You have to find the thing we both want. Usually it is. We both want you to get out of the hospital. Or, we both want you to be able to sleep. OR. We both want the anxiety to stop. You say, okay, Adrian, you don't think you're sick. I understand that. But you do want to get out of here, right? And the doctor says you can't leave until you sleep for 3 nights in a row. Can we agree that sleeping is the way out? P. Partner. Work together. Once we agree on the goal, getting out, sleeping, stopping the fear, we partner up to achieve it. You say, I'm on your team. Let's figure out how to get you out of here. If taking this pill helps you sleep so they discharge you, maybe it's worth it just to get past them? Do you see the difference? You aren't forcing me to admit I'm schizophrenic. You are helping me game the system to get what I want, freedom. And the side effect is that I take the medicine that saves my life. Don't become the villain. During my intervention, my family tried to physically block me. They tried to use force. And in that moment, they became the enemy. I know you feel helpless. I know you want to tackle us to stop us from ruining our lives. But whenever possible, try to step to the side of the conflict rather than standing in front of it. If I say, I need to drive to Malibu, and you say, no, you can't, we fight. If you say, okay, tell me about Malibu, what's the plan? Do we have gas money? It's late? Maybe we start in the morning after breakfast? You are delaying. You are de-escalating. You are waiting for the mania to dip or for the professionals to arrive. You are keeping the connection open so that when the crash happens, and it will happen, I call you instead of running into the snow, the oxygen mask. Finally, a word on your own survival. Dealing with a loved one in psychosis is traumatic. You are living in a state of hypervigilance, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You cannot save me if you drown. You need your own support. You need your own therapist. You need to set boundaries. It is okay to say, I love you, but I cannot listen to the conspiracy theories right now. Let's talk about dinner. You are the co-pilot, but you can't fly the plane for me. You can only help me find the runway. Chapter 15. Crisis Planning. The fire drill. Nobody wants to think about their house burning down, but responsible people still buy fire extinguishers. They still have a plan for how to get out of the bedroom if the hallway is filled with smoke. In mental health recovery, there is a temptation to say, "I'm better now. It will never happen again." I understand that urge. I want to believe that the Malibu mission was a one-time event. I want to believe I will never again crash a truck or walk into traffic. But believing that doesn't make it true. Schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are often cyclical. They have seasons. The most dangerous time for a patient is not when they are sick. It is when they are well, but unprepared for the next storm. We need a crisis plan. Not because we are pessimistic, but because we are realistic. When the entities come back, or when the dopamine flood starts, my rational brain will go offline. I will not be able to make good decisions. I will not be able to find my insurance card. I will not be able to advocate for myself. I need to make those decisions now while I am sane, so that my future self is protected. The document, Psychiatric Advance Directive, PAD. If I have a heart attack and I am unconscious, the doctors know to look for a medical ID or an advance directive to know my wishes. Mental health should be no different. A Psychiatric Advance Directive, PAD, is a legal document that speaks for you when you cannot speak for yourself. When I am in the grip of the Archon delusion, I might scream that I refuse all medication. I might scream that the hospital is a prison. But right now, sitting here in my right mind, I know that the hospital saves my life. A PAD allows me to write a letter to my future doctors. It can say things like, I consent to hospitalization if I'm a danger to myself. I respond well to specific medication A. Do not give me specific medication B because it gives me severe akathisia and makes me suicidal. Please allow Mom/Dad to visit me even if I say I don't want to see them. Here is the contact info for who takes care of my dog bills. This document changes the dynamic. When I show up at the ER screaming about the Galactic Federation, the doctors don't just see a crazy person. They see a prepared patient who knows their history. It gives my family a tool to override my delusion with my own sanity. The warning signs, the prodrome. Psychosis rarely explodes out of nowhere. It doesn't go from normal to zombies in the yard in 5 minutes. There is almost always a slow burn, a buildup called the prodromal phase. You need to become an expert in your own relapse signature. For me, the signs are specific. Sleep disruption. This is always the first domino. If I stay up all night 2 nights in a row, the door is opening. The seeking returns. I start Googling conspiracy theories again. I start looking for signs in license plates. I start talking about frequency and vibration more than usual. Social withdrawal. I stop texting friends back because I feel like I'm on a different level than them. Sensory changes. Colors look too bright. Sounds feel too loud. The patterns in the floor start to wiggle slightly. The yellow alert agreement. I have an agreement with my family. If they see these signs, they are allowed to call a yellow alert. They can say, Adrian, we noticed you haven't slept, and you're talking about the Pleiades again. We are worried. Can we call the doctor together? Because we agreed on this before I got sick, I am less likely to accuse them of being agents. I know that I gave them permission to say this. Financial guardrails. We have to talk about the money. During my mission, I tried to buy a $100 million property in Malibu. Thank God I didn't have the money, but I did have enough money to rent a luxury SUV, burn tanks of gas, and buy expensive things I didn't need because I thought I was manifesting wealth. Mania and psychosis are expensive. If you have access to credit cards or savings, you can ruin your financial future in one weekend. The trusted co-signer. If possible, have someone you trust on your accounts who can see unusual activity. Credit freeze. You can freeze your credit so you can't open new cards during a manic episode. Daily limits. Set limits on your debit card. It feels restrictive, like being treated as a child. But it is better than waking up from a psychotic break to find out you are bankrupt. The go bag. The hospital is boring, it is uncomfortable, and usually, when you get taken there, it is an emergency. You leave the house in handcuffs or an ambulance, wearing nothing but a t-shirt and tennis shoes, like I did in the snow. You show up freezing, bored, and without underwear. I now keep a small bag packed, or at least a list of things for my parents to bring me immediately. Slip-on shoes. They will take your shoelaces. Walking around in socks is degrading. Buy cheap slip-on Vans or slides. Soft pants. Jeans are uncomfortable to sleep in. Sweatpants, with the drawstring removed, are gold. A list of phone numbers. They take your phone. Do you know your best friend's number by heart? Probably not. Write them down on paper. Paperback books. Hardcovers can be considered weapons. Bring soft, easy-to-read fiction. No metaphysics books. The Oxygen Mask. Finally, this plan isn't just for me. It is for the people who love me. When I crashed my truck, my parents were traumatized. When I walked into traffic, they lived in terror. Having a plan allows them to sleep at night. It tells them, we are not helpless. If the monster comes back, we have a net. Crisis planning is the ultimate act of taking responsibility. It is me saying to the universe, I might have a condition that breaks my reality, but I will not let it break my life. Conclusion. The new normal. The funeral for the prophet. There is a secret that people recovering from psychosis rarely talk about because it sounds ungrateful. We miss the magic. For a year, I was the protagonist of a cosmic drama. I was a starseed. I was a commander. I was vibrating at a frequency that could, in my mind, phase through doors and teleport across the country. Every song on the radio was a personal message. Every license plate was a wink from God. My life was filled with color, urgency, and profound meaning. When the medication worked, when the voices stopped, the patterns in the floor settled down, and the mission evaporated, I didn't just feel relief. I felt grief. I felt like I had been demoted. I went from being a galactic warrior to being a guy named Adrian who had a wrecked truck, a confusing medical record, and a lot of apologies to make. Recovery felt boring. It felt gray. It felt like I had gone back to sleep. I want to validate that feeling for you. If you are sitting there, taking your meds, and feeling a deep, hollow sadness because the gods aren't talking to you anymore, you aren't failing at recovery. You are grieving. You are mourning the loss of a version of yourself that felt infinite. The quiet victory. But here is what I found on the other side of that grief. The magic was expensive. It cost me my sanity. It cost me my safety. It almost cost me my life in a snowbank. It terrified my parents. It isolated me from everyone who actually loved me. The real people, not the archetypes. The boring world, the world of gravity, friction, and silence, is actually a gift. There is a quiet dignity in being able to trust your own mind. There is a profound relief in knowing that a door is just a door and you don't have to run into it. There is safety in knowing that the nurse is just a nurse, not an archon plotting your demise. I eventually realized that I didn't need to be a chosen one to be valuable. Being a human being is hard enough. It is a miracle enough. The mechanic and the map. I wrote this book because I wanted to leave a map for the next person who gets lost in the cornfield. I am not a doctor. I am not a guru. I am just a traveler who went off-road, crashed, and found his way back to the highway.